Okay, so you want to try and learn a second language, but you don't know how. You don't know if it's possible, you don't know if you can do it, you don't know how long it's going to take. Well, the good news is I've been through this over the last couple of years learning Spanish. So in this video, I want to talk about how long it takes, how difficult it is, if you can do it, and all that good stuff. So without further ado, let's get into the video. And welcome back. So my name is Alex, welcome back to the Lifting Nomad. And again, in this video, I want to talk about how long it actually takes to learn a second language, how difficult it is, if it's possible for you, how much it's gonna cost, all that good stuff. So first things first, I think there's a natural ability and a natural fluency that a lot of people have if they grew up in a bilingual household. So to be clear, I am semi-fluent in Spanish at this point after studying for over a year in the language. Now keep in mind, growing up, I'm Canadian, we learned French in school, and there is definitely a correlation between the two. A lot of the verbiage and the verbs in general have the same root word. So for instance, like, I don't know, swimming is nadar in Espanol, and in French it's nager. So very similar sort of idea, and then the conjugations sort of follow that as well. The other thing that I think made it a little bit easier for me is the sentence structure is the same in French and Spanish. So all the Romance languages tend to follow a similar sort of sentence structure, which I think helped me pick up Spanish a little bit faster than I would have otherwise. One of the main things, for instance, is in English, we say I am 28 years old, but in French or Spanish, we would say I have 28 years. So, j'ai 28 ans, yo tengo 28 años. So it's, very similar sort of idea in the sentence structure. So I think that made it a little bit easier, but I was never fluent in French to begin with. So there's definitely a lot of people who have a natural start if their parents were bilingual and they taught them in the household and it was just around them. Maybe their family or their grandparents were speaking a different language. A lot of immigrants tend to be able to speak multiple languages, particularly if they come from, countries like India that have so many different dialects. They tend to be able to speak multiple languages. And then once you have a second language, it's generally easier to pick up a third one as well because you've understood the learning process and how to actually do it. Of course, there's a ton of benefits to learning a second language as well. On average, someone who can either play an instrument and read music or speak a second language tends to offset the effects of cognitive diseases, things like dementia and Alzheimer's, by up to 10 years because it uses a part of your brain that you don't normally use in a normal life if you were just going about in one certain way. So it's kind of an interesting concept to think about and something that's super, super valuable to know, whether you're applying for jobs, whether you're traveling or wherever you're going to be. Having a second language in your back pocket is immensely helpful, particularly my Spanish, looking at me, I don't look like someone who can speak Spanish. So when I travel, a lot of times wherever I'm going in South America or Central America, people tend to try and take advantage of people who look like me. It's just the way those countries work. But when you can speak Spanish and actually hold your own, for instance, you don't get taken advantage of. You're able to pay prices accurately for like shops or taxis or whatever it may be. So that sets the stage for kind of why you should give a shit about learning language and how difficult it's going to be. Now, when I first started, I tried for I would say like 6 months to learn on Rosetta Stone, and I made it pretty far into that program. I was doing like a combination of Duolingo, Rosetta Stone, and then just like online homework. And then it came to, I went to a trip to Mexico and I couldn't speak it whatsoever. Like it was completely essentially gone from my brain by the time I got there. So I was able to read like menus and I don't know, like texting maybe if I was able to pick out a few words, but I couldn't converse whatsoever. And the reality is, most people, you're going to be using the language in person. It's going to be fast, it's going to be quick, they're going to be using their local dialect. Something else to keep in mind is that wherever you're learning this language from, it's going to vary place to place. So for instance, in Spanish, like she or her is ella. In Porteño Español in Argentina or Uruguay, it's Aisha. So all the double L's, instead of a y sound, it's a sh sound. And then if you're for instance in like Peru or like, maybe Peru's not a great example, maybe Puerto Rico or Dominican, they speak very, very fast compared to Peru or Mexico. So little things like that are going to vary place to place, but generally I think starting with something like Rosetta Stone or Duolingo is not going to do you any justice. So what I recommend is doing something like Preply, where you're actually working with a tutor and you're able to speak one-on-one during those conversations and getting time under your belt and actually conversing in that language. It's going to do a couple of things. So I've been with my same tutor for almost a year now. So I've had the same tutor. We've done 2 or 3 classes every single week for an hour for that full year. And I would say at this point, I am like mediocre to okay at Spanish. Like it takes a long time to become fluent. And I know, I took it for granted and I was maybe a little bit biased when I would see people flipping back and forth between English and French or English and Spanish. I'm like, wow, that's kind of cool. Maybe it's like, pretty easy for me to learn. No, like you have to have a lot of appreciation for people who can speak multiple languages. It is not easy. And if they grew up that way, it's going to be a lot easier. That's why definitely if you have the opportunity, if you're watching this still in like, late high school or even university or college, and you can take elective courses that have a language in it, I would highly recommend it. It's one of my biggest regrets, I think, is just focusing on my business degree and not really giving a shit about other languages. If I could go back, that's something that I would do during school. But it's really a combination of, okay, understanding how much do I need to converse a week and how much do I actually need to practice the language? Because let's say you converse, but you don't know any nouns or you don't know any verbs. So it's really a combination of daily practice of your vocabulary as well as a consistent amount of time where you're actually using the language out in public. So if you have, for instance, like one of my good friends is Colombian, I try to speak Spanish whenever I'm with him. That way I get that extra practice in. And the thing that separates like a tutor from just being immersed, like for instance, this winter I lived in Argentina, Uruguay, Mexico, Colombia, Peru for almost 5 months. And you're immersed in that culture. So everything around you, every menu, every street sign, every person is speaking in Spanish. But the challenge is a lot of the times you're having these very repetitive conversations of essentially the same thing. Like if you're getting into an Uber or you're going to a restaurant or you're at a grocery store, it's gonna be, essentially the same thing. Hello, how are you? I'm going here, thank you, goodbye. Or if you're at a restaurant, I'll have, a table for 4. I'll have this, thank you. Here's the bill, I'll pay with credit card. Thank you, have a good night. So you don't really get to have those more elaborate conversations that lets you practice different vocabularies in different contexts. That's really going to elevate your ability to speak that language. So with a tutor, you basically get a dedicated one-on-one session for an hour to, kind of how it worked for me was at the beginning, the first like 3 to 4 months, I would say, we just, essentially it was like a true tutoring class where she was explaining conjugations of past tense, future tense, present tense, how we use these different words, how to pronounce things like that. But later in the cycle, and now we are almost a year in, we pretty much just talk shop. Like she knows a lot about me, I know a lot about her, and we pretty much just talk about our day, like what we're doing this weekend, what kind of plans we have, where we went for dinner, if we watched any cool movies, if we have any trips planned, that kind of thing. So it's, those sort of conversations where you're getting a little bit more in depth and it's going to test your ability versus just saying like, hola, ¿qué tal? The same thing, like, hey, what's up, every single time. So the tutor, I think, is really what set me apart. And I met a lot of people traveling over the last few months where they were just doing like Duolingo and they've had like a year streak on Duolingo and you're like, oh wow, that's impressive. But the reality is they don't really know that much. So maybe they can have those, hey, how are you conversations, but they definitely couldn't like go on a date with a local and have like an in-depth conversation. So it's really a different level of fluency, I think, once you're getting in that habit of actually conversing on a daily basis for a longer period of time. So I think the best thing you can do is practice Duolingo, let's say for like 30 minutes every single day to practice your vocabulary, practice your verbs, and then as well do a session with a tutor for 1 hour. I think 3 times a week is ideal. I think in a perfect scenario, if you could, is 2 different tutors from 2 different countries. Potentially even 3, but I think then you start to lose a little bit of the relationship that you may have with 2 people. And the reason I say that is because, like I said at the beginning, different countries have different dialects, different accents, different way of talking. So if you only learn, like, let's say Mexican Spanish, and then you go to Peru or Argentina, it's gonna be a little bit different and you're gonna have a bit of a harder time adjusting to it. I was just living in Buenos Aires in Argentina, and one of my best friends living down there, he was from Peru. And the first, he's fluent in Spanish, he grew up in a Spanish speaking household. And the first few weeks there, it was kind of funny to see like the Spanish breakdown where he was completely fluent, but after communicating for a little while, they would just have that moment of, what did you just say? Because of the different dialects and different accents, you just kind of lose things along the way. So I think that's been my experience learning a language almost a year in. It's, as a grown adult is definitely harder. And like I said, if you have the chance of doing it while you're in school, or if you're a parent and you have, kids who are like still in grade school, I would highly stress like potentially things like in Canada, we have French immersion where you can go to a school and just be like, again, immersed in that language. As a kid, you just pick these things up so much faster if it's all around you, and then you're gonna set them up for the rest of their lives. So hopefully that is something that you're able to do. But that's pretty much going to be this video. Hopefully it was useful to understand kind of my perspective as someone being a grown adult trying to learn a new language. It's been tough but extremely rewarding. I think I just went on a trip with my dad, and he hadn't seen me since I came back from my 5-month trip in Latin America. And we went to Mexico, and I was actually able to like converse with locals, and it was kind of funny to see the look on his face when he realized like, holy shit, this kid can speak Spanish. So it's a nice satisfaction, and I think especially like something you can do that is going to set you apart. Like I was able to go on dates with Spanish speaking people. I'm able to like shop and go out on my own and not be as stressed. Like I lived in Colombia last year and I didn't speak any Spanish, and then this year I did speak Spanish, and it was much more comfortable going around in the world. I'm able to like be independent and do my own thing. I can order cabs, I can order food, I can ask how much something is in a store. Like I'm just a lot more comfortable on the streets. And then as well, you just understand if people are talking about you. Like if you're walking down like potentially like a busy intersection, you can hear people are like looking at you and talking about you. So it just makes you like a little bit more comfortable when you're able to do that. So hopefully this was useful. If it was, feel free to leave a like and a comment in the section below. It always helps the algorithm. But as always, my name is Alex. Welcome back to Lifting Nomad. We'll see you next one. Peace.